Let's get started. Hey, everybody.
Hey there.
Hello, and welcome to The New Normal, a series of virtual discussions intended to help us get out of our comfort zones and debate different perspectives of the future. My name is Todd Terrazas, and I'm your host. On this episode, we have Kathryne Cooper giving a talk on saying yes and no, healthcare, technology, and more. Super interested about that more. Kathryne Cooper, MBA, who has an MBA, is a native Angeleno, passionate about growing and funding early-stage companies and creating an ecosystem to support entrepreneurs. She believes in applying a growth mindset to startup challenges and is interested in the integration of technology in settings that are traditionally analog. Since 2017, Kathryne has served as the co-director of the West Coast Consortium of Technology and Innovation in Pediatrics. Kathryne is the head of CTIP's investment arm, where she selects medical device companies with commercialization potential, high clinical impact, and proprietary technology for investment and support. Kathryne engages in the investment community at large, building relationships with venture capitalists, angels, and strategic partners to advance MedTech innovation within the CTIP portfolio. Now, following her talk, we will go into a breakout rooms for about 20 minutes. Afterwards, we will return to this main room for an open discussion. If you're watching this episode on Facebook, you can join us on Zoom, visiting thenewnormalseries.com. Now, without further ado, here's Kathryne Cooper.
Cool, guys. Well, nice to meet everybody at the New Normal. Thanks for taking your lunchtime and hanging with me. So I'm going to give a talk on saying yes and no, healthcare, technology, and more. It's probably going to be a little bit more of the more than the health and tech, but a little bit about me, which Todd already alluded to. So what do? I support early stage healthcare innovators. And what does that mean? I run a MedTech accelerator that supports medical device companies from concept to commercialization. They're specifically creating devices for the pediatric population. And so how do I support these early stage innovators? With capital and resources. And why do I do that? Because patient impact is really important to me. I started my career in medicine, attending 3 years of medical school at USC before deciding the life of a practicing clinician wasn't for me. I then pivoted to business development and strategy at HealthTech startups, got an MBA, and then found myself back specifically in healthcare, now supporting these early stage healthcare innovators who are creating tech that physicians will use. And so creating solutions that can impact patient outcomes on a broad scale is super, super important to me. But in order to support these innovators at these earliest stages, you have to say a combination of yes and no. And so what does that mean? It means as a startup, there are essentially hundreds of things that you could do at a time. But which one of those is the rate limiting step? That's what we help identify at CTIP. Because we're working with medical device companies, if getting them through the FDA pathway is, what's going to keep them from other points of traction, whether that's investment or clinical adoption or clinical trials, and that's the step that we want to support. We want to connect them with a regulatory consultant or help them figure out their strategy. So I describe the saying yes and no that you can apply to startups. You can essentially apply to your own lives. I would think at any given time, there are probably, tens or hundreds of things that you could do, especially in this new normal while you're stuck at home, and your home is your office, is your fun place, and every now and then your gardener comes when you're on a Zoom and you're like, this is the worst. So I apply the yes and no tactics to both our portfolio companies and myself. And so when I say to myself, I'll give this as an example. I essentially live my life by a color-coded Google Calendar. It's in my Twitter bio, and it looks something like this. It looks like just kind of like a nightmare. And I have different colors that mean different types of activities, in addition to having multiple accounts in that same calendar. And I only do it on my phone because I would be overwhelmed otherwise, but I want one central place where I know what fun things are happening, what work things are happening, and when talks like this are happening. So it's kind of like a little bit of a paint by numbers. And so I'll say, yes to things and no to things kind of based on a decision tree. And it's this concept of either expanding the pie or taking the biggest slice. So let's say you have a pie and that pie is your life. And you're choosing, should I give this talk to AILA? should I make this PowerPoint today? Should I say yes to this other ask to mentor a company or a startup? I think, is this going to expand my pie? Is this going to expand my experience, connections, network, or just serve as something that I like to do? Or is this one of those things where it's going to take the biggest slice, meaning the biggest slice out of my day without giving me something back that I enjoy or kind of need to fulfill myself in this new normal? So in the concept of health tech, the expanding the pie or taking the biggest slice, when we support early stage MedTech innovators at CTIP, we have limited capital and resources, whether those are human capital constraints, we're a small team of 6, whether that is actual dollar constraints, we're a $6.6 million fund supporting 89 portfolio companies. So that trickles down to check sizes of less than $50,000, but we want to make that money go to a place and expand that pie. And that's why we focus on the rate, what is the rate limiting step for portfolio companies at their stage. So we want to say, if we're going to connect you with whether that's resources or capital or someone in your network, we want that to return to 10x, and not necessarily in a traditional investment return sense, but that will help you get to the next step. And then you can circle back with us and we can continue to work with you. So I apply this mindset to both my work life and my life. When I say yes, I want to expand. I want that pie to be bigger. And when I say no, it's because I think it's taking too big of a slice of the capacity that I have right now. And that's kind of it. It's really a simple mental mindset and model, but I've adapted it through my work with companies and startups. And I started treating my own life as if I was a startup. And especially in a time like this, where we're in the middle of a pandemic, everybody's working at home, and you have so many competing priorities that I think you never had before. In addition, sometimes it seems like you have unlimited time because you're already at home. You don't have to drive to that networking event. You simply have to hop on Zoom and make sure your computer is charged. But that unlimited, time or concept that I could do all of the things right now, what's the one thing that I can do right now that'll make the other things possible or easier? So that's what I have for the group. And Todd, if you can take me to the slide that I shared with you, I've got a prompt for our breakout room. Great. Okay, so saying yes and no. As we go into our breakout rooms, I want you to think about the last time you said yes and no. So yes to something, and then you made a clear decision to say no to something. I want you to describe that to the folks in your breakout room, and then apply that pie logic. Did you expand the pie, or did you try to take the biggest slice? Or did that no try to take the biggest slice from you? And let's just practice using the framework. So Todd, I'll kick it off to you.
So we'll jump into the breakout rooms right now, and then we'll come back for open Q&A. Enjoy. Hey, Kathryne. So yeah, how was your breakout room?
Our breakout room was great. We went in to design thinking 101, the double diamond approach. We transitioned a little bit into some more AI specific things, but in terms of the yes and no part of the framework, Jasmine was really great and shared a specific situation where she said yes and no in graduate school, and then it spun off a discussion into kind of the more simple you can make mental frameworks, the easier they are to execute. So whether you're iterating a new idea as a startup, whether you're trying to understand the clinical application for AI, the more simple you can make your decision tree, the more easy it will be to replicate and scale. So that's what we came away from with our group.
Fantastic. Does anyone else have questions or like to share what you guys went over in your breakout room? How about you, Charlie?
Sure. We kind of discussed a lot about like flexibility with, if you have a yes but a no as well. It's kind of that in between phase. So how do you adjust to uncertain circumstances where sometimes you're given, half of the right answer or half of the opportunity or things like that. So we talked a lot about how, in times like these, you may not have a job, or you may not have the time, or you've got other responsibilities to deal with other people or things like that, that you would not have had normally. But now you've also been given some of the opportunities to work on creative stuff, self-reflection, organization. And if you can avoid some of the downfalls of a situation like that, with the sense of community or Zoom calls like this, things like that, there are some advantages to it if you can play your cards correctly and anticipate and look forward to where the ball is going and things like that. And I think it's kind of important to remain optimistic even in times when no one really knows what's going on. So that was it was yes and no. It's like, it's sort of okay in some aspects, and other aspects, you may have more challenges in, but how do you maximize the things you can control, and the things that are out of your control, you kind of just flow and stay flexible on. So that was mostly what we were discussing.
Thanks, Charlie. That's great. And I say yes and no to make it seem very, very binary. And that's because it forces you to make a decision. I find myself stuck in the middle or indecisive actually a lot of the time, and making myself say, yes, you're committing to this, or no, you're not doing that. Usually ends up with a sense of relief, but getting up to that point, it's very, very easy to kind of be in the spectrum, or to feel like you're not making the best decision because you don't have all the information, and you don't know all the factors involved. So I just encourage people to try to be more binary when you can, even though it feels uncomfortable, because making that, you can't anticipate what it's going to be like after you make that decision, and it makes other things possible because you've either committed or not committed.
Hey, Laura. Haven't seen you in a while. How was your breakout room?
It was Laura. Thank you. So.
Oh, that Laura. Sorry. Oh, whoops! I forgot there's two Lauras.
We're next.
Oh, sorry. There are two. Harrison, you can go first. How about
that? Okay, thank you. So we very briefly we review the concept of breadth and depth. So there's this challenge when you're pursuing an idea that you need to kind of so that you make sure you're covering all your bases, that you're being creative, that you're integrating all the possible solutions before you really narrow down. You need to have breadth, but a challenge comes really in deciding, I think, when to make that yes/no decision between, we know enough about this ecosystem, this space, and now we need to narrow down and actually commit to the technical expertise and the domain-specific expertise to get depth in whatever it is we're pursuing. But knowing when to make that decision is really, really difficult because the more breadth you acquire, more potential opportunities you see, and you can kind of have an initial vision, change course.
Laura, Kusumoto?
Hi there. I was actually in Charlie's group. He covered it pretty well, but I will add one thing, and that is that yes/no decision can be difficult sometimes when you are measuring short-term versus long-term pie eating. So sometimes you do something in the short term that is not as rewarding when you believe it will be in the long term.
Thanks, Laura. That's a really great point. And this also came up from our group that the yes/no decision didn't have to be in the same instance. So I gave to my group an example where I said yes and no, and it was actually both related to giving this talk. Yes being Todd asked me, I'm into it, I like this group, it's a chance to expand my network and share something that I think is interesting and learn from lots of other smart folks who are interested in taking their lunchtime to go to a chat to see what it's going to be like. And then The no in that instance was actually no to making a deck. I did make one slide, but that was the kind of MVP I could do for this because I don't like prompts where you can't see it written down. But that's because for me and what I had going on in the weeks before this, sitting down and writing my thoughts into a succinct PowerPoint deck that looked nice was a heavier lift. So I said, yes, I think I'm going to get a lot out of this talk and I can't wait to meet these folks. But no, well, making a deck to some, maybe actually a very, very tiny slice of the pie. For me, it was like half the pie and it was a hard no. But the yes and no don't always have to be in the same instance, at least in what I was trying to prompt with the example, even if they may.
Well, thank you for saying yes. And not everyone needs slides, so it was perfect.
Well, thanks for telling me that it was okay not to have them. I did ask.
It's always optional. Jeff, how was your group?
So I was in a group with Charlie and Laura also.
Oh.
But I think, so I really like the analogy. I like the pie analogy. Thanks for that. And this was a good reminder that it's important to say no sometimes. I was in early startup culture for quite a while, and I stayed in that mode for a long time. And it was always yes to everything. Right? There just wasn't enough of us. So whatever we had to do, we had to do. It was always yes. And then I held on to that for a long time, even after the company grew large. It was always yes, sure, I'll go do that. And it became too much. I said yes to way too much. So learning how to say no sometimes is still something I'm working on. So this was a good reminder of all of that. Thanks.
Thanks for sharing that. I admittedly struggle saying no as well, as my calendar share can prove. I probably say more yes than no, but as you said in that startup culture, and I brought this up with my group, if you think of your life as a startup and what will make it sustainable, right? If you need to continue and have bandwidth, energy, et cetera, to keep doing what you're doing, it becomes a critical skill to do that binary yes and no as you grow. Because I think as a startup, and as probably folks on this call are doing lots and lots of different things and have lots of different interests, but what can you do to make sure that you're gonna IPO in your life or something like that?
I forgot who said it, but someone said, what you say no to defines you. Because it's always right. It's pretty easy to be a people pleaser, always saying yes, over extending yourselves. I know I have that feeling, just always trying to do more with, at least with this community, right? And then I've had to say no and just kind of scale myself back and develop this new normal series once a week, which is also a big undertaking, but at least in the beginning. But I forget who said it, but it's about trying to say no more because it's easier to say yes. And so at least that's what I'm thinking about lately.
People pleasing is one aspect of it, but another aspect of it for me was somebody has to do it, right? So I kind of took the perspective of if it was something that I was worried that wasn't going to get done. The startup was rockets. It was SpaceX, right? So there were things that had to be done, and if nobody was doing it, I took it on my shoulders. It had to be done, right? Otherwise it's a potential failure or something like that. So so it's not, I don't think that was people pleasing so much as it was I never said that's not my job. When somebody tells me that's not my job, is an instant turn off for me. Like, it is all of our job. Every bit of it was, if that makes sense. I don't know, trying to still balance that one, trying to get past it's not my job versus, okay, we need to delegate this to the right team or something like that. So.
I think that's a really tough choice to make, especially at the early stages of companies or initiatives when, let's say there's 3 people on the team, and if these 2 don't do it, then this one is going to do it, or it's not going to get done, just like you said. So I think in those situations, and we run into that issue both with the early stage health tech innovators that we support, and sometimes with our own team for the capacity to support 89 portfolio companies and wanting to make sure that we're providing real value to them and helping them on their path to commercialization. So I think sometimes you can't get away from having to just do it because it won't get done. But I like to think of kind of building with the end in mind. If it's something that you can do once that could be delegated to, let's say, someone else in the future, or create a process around it so it's split up the next time it happens, is something that we try to develop in terms of our internal ops and structure. So it's kind of, if you went on vacation or got sick or something happened and this is some vertical that you do and you run, where are the directions that anyone on the team could take it over? You may do it the best, but some work still needs to get done. And so we think about that a lot with our work at CTIP and how we work ops-wise. And it takes a little bit longer in the beginning. It's kind of, we'd rather do the work than do the work and write a manual about how to do the work. But we found it's paid off a lot later when you face that decision tree to delegate, and then you end up saying, oh, well, there are no instructions and it's easier if I just do it again. And then that becomes a bigger issue and compounds because you only have so much capacity. And it more realistically inhibits your ability to scale as an organization or as a startup. And so that becomes a real problem. So it's worth that kind of extra 10% of effort in the beginning.
That's a good point. The organization has to support that, though. If just because you did something once means, okay, now that's the person that does it, then again, they're collecting everything to do.
Yeah, I think that's more of an org decision, but we like to at least reframe things for CTIP where one person may have done it once, but if we need to do this often, let's actually think of what were the pieces involved. Can multiple folks work on, 10 or 20% of the work, and one person is the owner, and just really take a little bit of extra time to think through that, so we can keep expanding our pie, and one member isn't just getting a giant, bigger and bigger and bigger slice. Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions or burning desires to say, or I think we can just wrap this up for the day? Overread, did you have anything? Oh, Jeff.
A quick comment. I think we could do a little bit longer breakout rooms, in my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah, but of course the final countdown gets everybody to be much more creative, right? Think of all the things you dream up in the last 45 seconds. One point that I'd want to toss out as another sort of useful pattern is accepting that, ultimately you're probably going to make some mistakes and make some bad calls. And especially if you have friends in the movie business, everybody can tell a story about the director or the script that they passed on, and it ended up turning into a blockbuster. So the key there is to just sort of accept that's part of the game. It's going to happen, and it'll be some good stories at a party when you're old and gray.
Yeah, definitely good. Yeah, living in LA, right? Everyone has that idea, that story of like missing out on that investment, or like you said, a script, or not being able to work with that certain actor or that certain person, and yeah, and then they go on to do great things. But that's life. Well, yeah, I guess that's. First, I want to thank Kathryne so much for taking the time today to share your mental model and how you work at CTIP, and how we can say yes and no more in our lives. And so, thank you so much for your time. And thank you all for showing up today, again, on the new normal. Next week, we actually have 2 different shows going on. On Wednesday, August 5th, we are doing a debate, first time ever, at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That will be pretty interesting. So they're debating, are machines conscious? And so I'll send you a link in the chat for that. And then also we have another new normal series, new normal episode on reimagining AI ethics with Renee Cummings. And so that'll be on Thursday next week, same time, same place. And hopefully you'll all be able to enjoy that discussion as well. And so enjoy the rest of your day, stay healthy, stay happy, and we'll see you next time. So thank you all. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Thanks for joining.
Thanks.